Ever find yourself scrolling through social media and suddenly, bam, you're hit with this wave of like, wait, why doesn't my life look like that?
Well, I think we've all been there. It's so easy to get caught in that comparison trap.
Right. And then that little voice pops up, the one that's like, not good enough.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're questioning everything.
It's that inner critic we all have. But what's interesting is that so much of this comes down to self-image, the way we see ourselves.
And the good news is we can actually change that, which is what we're diving into today. Someone sent over these 5 tips for cultivating a more positive self-image, and they're good, like really good, ready to jump in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so tip number 1 is all about self-acceptance.
Which is so important, but can also be a bit tricky to wrap your head around because it's not about just throwing in the towel and saying, well, this is me, take it or leave it.
It's not about giving up on growth, right?
Exactly. It's more about recognizing that we are all a work in progress. We all have strengths, and yeah, we all have those areas where we're like, ugh, still working on that. Self-acceptance is about being kind to ourselves through that process.
Instead of beating ourselves up for not being perfect already.
Right. Like imagine a friend came to you struggling with something. You wouldn't tell them, well, you're just a failure, give up.
Hopefully not.
Huh, exactly. You'd offer support and encouragement. Self-acceptance is about treating ourselves with that same compassion.
Being on our own team for once.
Yes. Which brings us to tip number 2, limiting comparisons.
Oh, this one's huge, especially in the age of, well, perfectly curated Instagram feeds and all that.
It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking everyone else has it all figured out while we're over here, like...
Like a hot mess. I've been there. I remember when I first started getting into like cooking, I was determined to make these amazing dishes. But every time I'd compare my creations to those picture-perfect food blogs.
And it's never just a pinch of salt, right? It's like
Yeah.
they magically have 20 obscure spices you've never even heard of.
Exactly. I was ready to give up on ever making anything other than toast.
Mm.
But then I realized comparison was stealing my joy. It was keeping me stuck.
And that's the thing, right? Comparing ourselves to others rarely motivates us. In fact, it usually just makes us feel worse.
So what's the alternative? How do we break free from that cycle?
By shifting our focus inward, instead of measuring our progress against others, it's about celebrating our own individual journeys.
Which honestly can be a game changer. Now, this next tip, I'll be honest, I was a bit skeptical about it first. Positive affirmations.
Yeah, I get it. It can sound a bit.
Cheesy.
Hmm.
Like something you'd see on a motivational poster with the sunset.
Yes. But the science behind it is fascinating. It all comes down to this concept called neuroplasticity. Basically, our brains have this amazing ability to change and rewire themselves based on our thoughts and experiences.
As we're constantly bombarded with negative self-talk, our brains start to believe it's true.
Right. But the good news is the opposite is also true. When we intentionally feed our minds positive affirmations, we're essentially rewiring those neural
It's like
pathways.
we're replacing those old negative tapes with something more empowering,
Exactly. And over time, it can actually change the way we see ourselves.
which is pretty incredible. Okay, so we've talked about self-acceptance, ditching comparisons, and embracing the power of positive self-talk. What's next?
Well, our self-image isn't just influenced by what's going on in our own heads. The people we surround ourselves with also play a huge role.
Oh, 100%. I've definitely had friends who, well-meaning as they were, always seem to bring out the worst in me. You know the type.
The energy vampires.
Yes. And afterward, I just feel so drained and negative.
It's true. Negativity can be contagious. But you know what else is contagious? Positivity.
So choosing to spend time with people who lift us up and inspire us, that's crucial too.
It's like giving ourselves a self-esteem boost. And finally, we come to tip number 5. Celebrate your achievements.
Because, let's be real, sometimes we can be our own worst critics. So taking the time to acknowledge our wins, even the small ones, is so important.
It's easy to get caught up in the hustle and always be striving for the next big thing, but those little victories, they matter. They remind us of how far we've come.
So giving ourselves permission to say, hey, you did it.
Yes, celebrate those wins. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think the common thread running through all of these tips is,
Kindness.
yes, being kinder to ourselves, both in the way we talk to ourselves and in the way we treat ourselves. It's an ongoing process.
It's a journey, not a destination. And speaking of journeys, this has been an amazing deep dive.
I agree. So much good stuff to think about.
Like, what have we actually scheduled time for self-celebration? just like we would for a doctor's appointment or anything else important.
That's such an interesting idea.
Right. Like, what if we blocked out even just 5 minutes each day to acknowledge our accomplishments and appreciate how far we've come? Something to think about. And on that note, that wraps up another deep dive. Until next time.